Morning. Bill Kim here from the Presbyterian and Congregational Churches in Clarion. Mr. Bunn has returned from Arizona and he's behind the camera now. Thanks to Jim for covering for all that time while Ted was gone. Thank you, Ted, for picking this back up. We've been trying to work on for a while now doing some little 2-minute or so blurbs where we summarize the sermon for the day. And today we read from Luke chapter 19 about the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem and the story about how as Jesus rode that colt into town, the people shouted Hosanna and sang psalms to him, declared that he was the king. And towards the end of the reading for today, Jesus says to the Pharisees who want him to keep his disciples under control and quiet, Jesus says, well, if they were quiet, then the stones themselves would shout out. Not too far down the road now, because we're in Holy Week, not too far into the book of Luke, there is the story about how the crowds reject him. And the very people who once today saying he is the king, then tomorrow want to crucify him. I think the point that Luke is trying to make in this gospel reading is that Jesus is the king. What the people have to understand is Jesus is a different kind of king than they anticipate. Jesus is a king who's not about a palace. Jesus is a king who's not about an army. Jesus is a king who's not about himself. Jesus is a king who's not about elevating himself and keeping everybody else as his servants. Quite the opposite of that. Jesus is a king who's about serving. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. Jesus came to show us that the best way to life, the most fulfilling way to life, is not about being on the top or being the most powerful or being the richest or being the one in charge. Actually, the way to the most fulfilling life is to be the servant, like Jesus modeled for us. I think the reason the crowd turned so quickly is that they realized that Jesus wasn't going to be the king they wanted. He wasn't going to throw off the Roman occupiers. He wasn't going to put them in a position of power. Instead, Jesus showed them the way to life is through sacrifice. The way to be all that you're supposed to be, all that you were created to be, all that you can be, is to love and serve others. That's Palm Sunday. That's the kind of king that we're connected with, and we're connected with King Jesus. Is a king who's not about himself, but it's about loving and serving others. So this week, as we begin Holy Week, I encourage you to consider Jesus being your king, a very different king than the world promotes, but being your king, your true king. May that be so. Amen.